All right, you're back in the DFSR. It's an MLB podcast. It's Wednesday. It's June 12th. I'm Doug Norrie. That is
James Davis.
And we are going to be talking an evening slate of MLB action for FanDuel and DraftKings. Maybe we'll get some betting talk in there as well. We're from dailyfantasysportsrankings.com. But you don't want to type in all those letters because you're lazy. You want to go DF. Now, you know what? Never mind. You're not lazy. I take it back. You, the listener, are not
You're
not
hardworking.
You're hardworking. Yeah, you're so laser focused that the type in all those letters on your keyboard would just
You meant to say laser focused, but it sounded like lazy for a second.
Well, you say tomato, I say tomato. But you want to type in DFSR.com, DFSR.com/deals. We'll get you, the podcast listener, started on our premium projections powered by our good friends over at Lineup Lab. Optimal lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings, MLB, and NFL when the season comes around, NBA, obviously. It's all covered in the one subscription. So DFSR.com/deals will get you going. We are going to kind of skip over the afternoon slate of Wednesday action as we usually do on this podcast, just because by the time it comes out, some of these slates are maybe starting in earnest. So we'll focus on the evening run of games. And I think there's plenty to talk about here, so I'm not too worried about it. Where do you want to start? Let's start with pitching. There's some good arms going here. Some bums, too. We'll get to the bums shortly. It's easy to make a case against some of these guys because there are some truly, truly terrible pitchers going here today. But there's some good ones, too. There's some ace-level kind of guys. Where do you want to start in terms of cash games? FanDuel, DraftKings, I don't know if you see a difference between, like, the pricing's making a difference between those two sites for you today. But where do you want to start here with pitchers?
Well, yeah, it's a really interesting slate today, Doug.
I know you were practicing that. I know you were practicing that. Like before we started recording, you're like, "This is just really interesting." Let me make it sound believable.
It's mid-June, buddy. We got 3 more months of this thing. It's like how they say, like, when you're not feeling good, you just have to smile anyway because that will like release the endorphins or whatever. That's how I feel about as the DFS baseball season goes along sometimes. And it's not for lack of love of baseball, by the way. I read every article on FanGraphs. It's just sometimes it's hard to find interesting things to say about which players to play for DFS on a given day. That being said,
let me cut in there real quick. I just don't want to say season baseball. And look, this is a DFS podcast, so I'm not bagging on baseball. It's just baseball for DFS purposes can be a labor of love, especially if you're kind of coming around to this podcast now. Baseball in a lot of ways does play better in season long. We actually did our first piece of season long content that came out on Sunday with Chris Thorell's waiver wire report. So he's going to be kind of publishing that each week. But yeah, baseball definitely is like more of a long game than a short game. I just want to try to clarify your maybe. I don't want to call it disinterest because man, when
I was the one that said it was an interesting slate, and you're the one that started jumping down my throat about it.
All right, hit us up with some pitches here. Where do you want to go?
All right, fine. So yeah, first of all, I do think it might be a little bit different on FanDuel and DraftKings today, and I'll explain why. So Verlander is the obvious ace going today. Obviously the 2.4 ERA is going to draw a lot of attention. The 10.57 Ks per nine, like the guy is still an ace level pitcher, even if the peripherals are trailing last season's like truly exorbitant numbers, at least on some level. And I think both on FanDuel and DraftKings, you will see some ownership. The thing that's kind of the fly in his ointment, I guess, today is that he's going up against Brandon Woodruff and the Milwaukee Brewers. And right now, Verlander's only a minus 131 favorite. And a lot of that's because Woodruff himself has been basically Verlander's equal this year. He's got a 10.9 K per nine, a 3.43 xFIP, which actually surpasses Verlander. So, you have two really, really good pitchers going up against one another. And Woodruff, one of those rare cases of a guy who's moved over from the bullpen and just been just as effective as a starter. So, in what's essentially a pick'em, I wouldn't be shocked to see our projection system lean in a less expensive direction. Because it's not that Verlander isn't the best pitcher on the slate. I believe that he is. It's just that when you have other pitchers that have, like Joey Lucchesi, for instance, has almost exactly the same implied runs against today, and he's much less expensive. So I could definitely see our system leaning in that direction.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Woodruff because I think he's going to end up being something of a consideration as a pitcher too on DraftKings as well.
Definitely, so cheap.
And it's crazy too because what you really typically don't want to do for DFS purposes, it's again a little different for season long, but for DFS purposes, running good pitchers into really good hitting teams, usually you can avoid it, right? There's usually enough options where you don't need to really think about like in this case, running Verlander against the Brewers, or going the other way, running Woodruff against the Astros, who, by the way, for all of their injuries, this is still a team that's hitting real. It's actually kind of amazing how good the Astros have been on offense this season, considering that they've lost Altuve. They're playing without Altuve, Springer, and Correa at this point right now. Like, arguably 3 of their 4 best hitters. Bregman's probably their best hitter, but Altuve and Bregman are close. But either way, the fact that they're looking so good, dealing with all these injuries, and yet at times, and this kind of helps us too, the sites will downgrade some of the pricing based on better matchups, or like we see in cores with better parks. So I think it's going to be a close kind of call here between Verlander and Woodruff. I wouldn't mind even stacking kind of both of them in cash games against each other, because the peripherals for the price do seem like they line up. What are your thoughts here on you mentioned kind of in passing Lucchesi? He's striking out more than a batter per 9. The xFIP is under 4. It's about a half run lower than his ERA this season. He draws a pretty strong matchup against a really, really underwhelming Giants team with, I believe that's the lowest implied total on the day. Actually, no, never mind. Houston and Milwaukee's right down there too. But is he a suitable pivot for you, knowing that this Giants team? I mean, I know they kind of switched things up a little bit with Yaz in the second spot and stuff, but it's still a pretty bad squad. How does he rank compared to the guys that you mentioned before?
Well, like I said, on FanDuel especially, he's just so much cheaper than Verlander in particular. Like, he's 7,900, and yeah, he doesn't have quite the same K stuff of the other guys that we've mentioned, but still striking out a batter per inning is plenty of strikeouts for a sub $8,000 price tag. And going against the Giants in San Francisco is just such a terrific matchup. I mean, you've got a team here that, yeah, they've moved some pieces around, but it really is shuffling around deck chairs on the Titanic. Yep. This team is dead last in the majors in WOBA against left-handed pitching. They're actually tied with the Marlins, but unlike the Marlins, they still strike out a lot. They strike out almost 24% of the time against lefties, with the second or third lowest walk rate in the majors against lefties as well. So it's really just a dream matchup from top to bottom. A great pitcher's park. I think that if you're just hunting around for floor, I think Lucchesi is good for that reason too. The only thing that I kind of don't like about him is he doesn't have a tendency to go super deep into games.
Yes.
He's averaging just 5.5 innings per start this season, so that's obviously not going to be on the level of a guy like Verlander. But again, in DFS, we're comparing production to price, and I think all factors taken together, the additional savings you get on Lucchesi really matter. And I know we'll get to stacks in just a little bit here, but there were some really, truly terrible pitchers going today, and you're going to want to invest as much as you can in the bats that are going up against those. So, yeah, all factors together, I think it's Lucchesi on FanDuel for me.
The good news on Lucchesi, too, with those innings per start is that it is a little bit left over from earlier in the season, because if you look at his more recent run, he had 5 innings last game, but before that it was 6 1/3, 6 2/3, 7 innings the 3 previous starts. So some of the innings pitched per start are left over from like a couple 4-inning starts in his first 6 games, the low 5s to start the year, when I think he was on a pitch count too. So I mean, I've been sort of slowly bumping up his sort of innings pitched and pitches per start as the season goes on, because it does seem like they're stretching out. He's been able to go a little longer games. He doesn't reach the heights of what Verlander can do on a given game. Like these guys like Verlander and Bauer and Scherzer, Sale, these are the guys that go. I'm throwing those other guys in because those, like Bauer, they run for like 120 pitches at times. Like these guys will just go out there, and the teams will just go out there and throw them a ton. Lucchesi is clearly not in that group. Last guy I kind of wanted to get your opinion on. This guy, I couldn't believe how young he still is. Jose Berrios is only 25. I for some reason just thought he was older. He feels like he's been in the major. He feels like he's been in the majors longer. That he should be older than he is. But like he must have made his debut when he was like 21 or 20. But his peripherals, the strikeouts aren't there, but the K to walk stuff is 8.5 Ks to 1.6 walks this season. He faces a Seattle team that really came out of the gate hot. They have definitely cooled off a little bit as the season's gone on, sort of predictably. Where do you land with him? He's the biggest money line favorite of the day at minus 230. How much do those win odds kind of play in for you? And at some point, can the win odds just kind of win the day, like on FanDuel too, where that specific stat is still very important?
Yeah, I mean, so it's kind of funny with Berrios. The tape on him as he was coming up was that he was going to be this overwhelming strikeout guy in the majors, and at least compared to the guys that we're really used to considering being ace level, Berrios really hasn't turned into that. He's actually turned into more of a command guy, which again, he always had decent control in the minors, but I don't think a lot of people projected him going full seasons with a sub-2 walks per 9. So yeah, he's a good pitcher. I think there's a high floor there. I think to your point about the money line. Goodness me, I'm losing track of my mind here. About the money line, I think that's a solid one on FanDuel as well. One thing that we see, though, is that these pitchers with a high floor, they tend to become pretty expensive pretty quickly, and I don't see Berrios as being that much better fundamentally than Lucchesi today. And since you only play one pitcher, paying $1,700 more for a guy who strikes out fewer batters per nine and has a higher implied runs against today, like that just doesn't seem like where I'm probably going to land. So I definitely think the floor is there. Interesting big tournament pivot from my perspective, but for cash, I don't see him quite getting over the hump.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about like sort of your pricing relative to consistency. We see this with basketball a lot too, right? If you're just kind of doing the same thing every single game for a couple weeks straight, you're just going to be priced out of contention, not because you're not good, but just because your price is reflective of what you just do on a very consistent basis. And baseball doesn't always lend itself to that because it's a high variance sport that your performances can really fluctuate from game to game, or you can run into 2 bad starts in a row and all of a sudden your price dips 10 to 15%, and then you buy on you buy the dip, as it were. But Berrios just hasn't suffered that kind of thing. Actually, another guy that hasn't really happened to this year, and I want to caution people because I think that he'll come up as some people will want to play him, is Mike Soroka. Mike Soroka is among the most expensive pitchers on this slate for sort of just the reason that we're talking about, except he's combining sort of consistency with just a massive amount of luck too. And so now you get a guy in Soroka against the Pirates today. Good money line favorite. Pirates are a fine matchup that you can go up against. He's 10,600 on FanDuel. Like that's 500 less than Verlander. And his peripherals, he strikes out less than 8 batters per 9, walks 2, fine, good pitcher. Like would take him on my team as a third starter or something like that. But the ERA, the 1.3 ERA, is just not tenable. The xFIP is a full 2 runs higher than this. So I think sometimes if you're still a person that gets caught up in ERA and gets caught up in like, oh, he's a gamer, 7 wins, this guy just kind of guts it out, or he just gets out. It's like a 219 BABIP and an 80% left on base percentage. That's just you're not gonna be able to sustain those things. So
no, probably not. I mean, Soroka's kind of interesting because he has been generating a lot more ground balls than I think many people pictured that he would, and that's why even with the relatively underwhelming K rates, he's still has a 3.51 xFIP for a 21-year-old pitcher. Like you're looking at a potential star in the making. It's just that for DFS purposes, you'd really prefer strikeouts rather than ground balls, and there's so much that goes on with how quickly he's getting out of innings that has inflated his fantasy points per game. And I think that's like where people really get hung up. Like if you read articles out there and they're talking about this guy has X fantasy points per game. Well, there's this cascading effect, right? So if you're getting out of innings faster than you would be under normal conditions, you're going to go deeper into games than you would under normal conditions. And a lot of Soroka's fantasy points per game have just come from sort of randomly going super deep into games. And one of the biggest reasons for that as well is the extraordinarily low home runs per 9. I mean, This guy's pitched 65 in a third innings this season. He's given up a single home run. There's just no indication that that's going to be the case for him throughout his career. I mean, he really did depress home runs per 9 in the minors as well. So, like, maybe there's something to it. But if he can actually, like, keep this up, I mean, he won't keep this up, but even some semblance of this up as he progresses through his career, he'll be a singular, unique pitcher for all time in baseball. And singular talents just don't tend to come around that often. So my bet is on some regression here.
Yeah, exactly. I wasn't calling him a bad pitcher. I think he's good. He's very good. It's not that. He's just not. He just shouldn't be he shouldn't be the second most expensive pitcher. Like, that's all. That's kind of what I was most on a slate that looks like this, like where you have these other guys that have some track record, have some better case stuff. That's all. That's kind of all I meant. He's still a big favorite. -230 is right up there with where Berrios is as well, and that's warranted. The Pirates are a bad team. Mitch Keller's terrible. We're going to talk about him in Stacks in a second. But so I'm clarifying. He's a good pitcher. I'm mostly relative to saying he's not an 11. He should not, with these peripherals. He's going to be cheaper than this many more times for the rest of the season than he's going to be more expensive, would be my guess. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll get back with some of those aforementioned stacks. Okay, let's get into some of these stacks. We have to start it off. I think everyone's going to kind of be starting here, is that we're getting a game between Edwin Jackson and David Hess. I can't even say it.
You don't like the combined 19 ERA for these guys so far this season?
It's just so funny with some of these teams. It's just like mid-June. The Blue Jays are throwing out Edwin Jackson.